Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So we're hosting one of our episodes in Marketing with Mark, and we're right now in Montreal, and we're hosting one of the most interesting people I've had a conversation so far with. I have with me, should I say Samuel or Sam?
Sam is good.
Okay, Sam. So Sam is with me here today. Sam is a person who went from corporations to nonprofits, and right now he's leading one of the main nonprofits, I would say, in Montreal, in Quebec province. And I'll leave the introduction also to you to tell me more about you and about the role you're currently doing.
Well, I'm lucky enough to serve as the CEO of a very iconic not-for-profit here in the city. It was founded in 1892, so that's a long time ago, and the situation on the ground in Montreal was very different. So back then, there weren't really any social services to speak of, but there were people in need. And so a number of institutions were founded in all parts of the country, frankly, around that period of time between the 1890s and the 1920s to serve Montrealers. And in my case, my drift, if you want to call it, towards the not-for-profit sector was unintentional. This was not in my career plan, but somehow with a variety of circumstances, all of which kind of led me in that direction, I ended up being asked to serve as the CEO. And every day when I come into my office, I walk by this plaque that has the names of all the CEOs and all the former chairmen of the board of the organization. And it's got my name on it too, with a dash, and it's empty. And so it reminds me that I'm nothing more than a caretaker for an iconic organization that exists to serve Montrealers in need.
Wow, that's actually a very nice way to look at it, because technically, like, in order for, like, we have a saying that, basically on the Middle Eastern side, in order for you to take over, someone has to technically step out or step down. But Sam, how would you say, because you're a person who came from a typical corporate, and then to nonprofit. How was the transition? How was the experience from here to there?
Well, I spent 14 years as a management consultant, so I had the experience of walking through a variety of organizations, for-profit organizations, and a few not-for-profit organizations as well. So I got to see an awful lot of different things, and I think that was helpful because one of the skills that you need to have in leadership is the ability to assess quickly, learn quickly, and listen well. And if you have some of those skill sets, then they can be helpful for wherever you go. Now, people often ask me, was there a major difference between the corporate world, if you will, and the not-for-profit world? And you know something, there are some differences. There are some important differences, but there are far more similarities. The notion that we have to serve people, that's important in the not-for-profit sector. Well, in the profit sector, you're serving customers. The need to manage assets, that exists on both sides of the curtain, if you will. And the need as well to motivate, inspire people, to make sure that you're a good leader of people, that would exist wherever you go as a leader. And so it's amazing the similarities that are actually there. And I would say that a leader in the for-profit sector could quite easily transition to being in the not-for-profit world, provided the circumstances were right and the individual was somebody who could learn quickly what the dynamics of that ecosystem are.
But let's say, what about the other way around? Do you think someone, a CEO, let's say, or someone leading in the nonprofit can go for profit?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would say that in the not-for-profit world, there has been a tradition of having people lead organizations who were deeply connected or rooted to the challenge that organization was trying to meet or trying to address. And sometimes that's not the best thing to equip you for leadership. It's just one dimension that you need. You need to care about the cause.
Correct.
But I think you need the leadership skills. You need the right level of education. You certainly need some expertise. You need to be able to find your way around a set of financial statements. And so if you don't have any of those skills, then I think the transition the other way might be slightly problematic.
Might be an issue. Because, it's great that you mentioned that, because also at the same point, thinking about it, we were talking earlier before we started recording that it's all about why do we do what we do. So Sam, why do you do what you do?
I think I'm totally motivated by an opportunity that I see right now in Canada and actually in a number of places in the Western world to redefine our understanding around how we treat vulnerable people. How do we deal with that segment of the population, if I can call it that? Because these are real people. These are people who are valuable. But for many years, the model of service in the community sector was a handout model, a charity model. And when I came to the sector, I was surprised by a number of things. I was surprised that they didn't have much in the way of data. So I was in these meetings all the time where people talked about lots and a growing percentage, and they used all kinds of words, but they never defined the problem appropriately. The other thing was that I felt like they were furiously working with all of the best of intentions, but the wrong service model. And you know, if you're doing the right thing the wrong way,
exactly,
you don't get the right kind of results. And so my personal why has been around trying to show people a different way of actually addressing a complex social problem. So if we take the complex social problem of homelessness, for example, I'll give you a very simple illustration. For 100 years, the rule of thumb was open up a shelter, invite people in, let them stay for the night, give them a shower, a change of clothing, and a meal. In the morning, tell them to get out and tell them to come on back tomorrow night. And everybody thought this was nice because, look, it took care of the poor, vulnerable people who were experiencing homelessness. But it did really help them. And so the interesting thing about the sector and the changes that we've seen in that sector is that it wasn't the government that came to us and said, you're doing the wrong thing. It wasn't the public that came to us and said, you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, the public would praise us endlessly. I don't know how many times I've been told, oh, you do good work. You do wonderful work. We ourselves began to question our model. And we said, hang on a second, are we really actually helping people? So when someone experiences homelessness, what do they need? They need a shelter? Do they need a warming center? Yes, maybe temporarily, but what they really need is a permanent place to call home. So what we began to do was to work towards that end. So all our services, regardless of what we did, were all tailored around how can we help somebody get from where they are and be accompanied back to where they really want to be.
Wow, this is actually a very great, it's a great way to look at it, because in a sense, as you were saying, that yes, giving them a place to stay for a night, this is like patching the problem, but actually giving them a home, this is actually finding a solution. But how can someone solve this problem? And with all this talks about the housing problem happening in Canada at the moment, this is a major move to it's going to play I would say a major problem or a role in what's going to come in the next years. I would say with all the government, the things that government is doing at the moment, I would say.
I think it's easy to sit back and say this is an intractable problem because it's huge, and we didn't get here in the last 2 weeks. It's been 30 or 40 years getting us to where we're at right now with some of the challenges, and it's going to take a while to get back out of it. But I do think we need to get started working on it right now. And what I've said to a number of people, and I said it just this morning in a news conference, is you need all three levels of government because it does affect the federal, provincial, municipal governments that we all have. But you also need the healthcare network involved. You need to make sure the business community is engaged. You need to make sure that the public is engaged so the public has a right view of the challenge. This is not about trying to give somebody a handout anymore. This is about not just social justice, but it's about an economic decision that says, as a country, we don't need to accept people living in homelessness. We need to be able to help them get to a better place. So when you can have that kind of effect on making sure that policy and public opinion are aligned, then you can actually make some changes. But it is going to take some time. This is not something that can be done overnight. But we need to start moving in that direction so that we can actually address the problem. And even in a housing crisis, which you mentioned, there are things that you can do that help you find housing. We housed somebody today. We do that every other day. We can find places. It's not easy. It's very challenging. But when you're creative and when you're innovative, when you work at it, you can find some things. Now, are we doing it at a big enough scale? Absolutely not. But governments need to have the courage to be able to fund this, because the cost of doing nothing or doing very little is far greater than the cost of doing something, as expensive as doing something is going to be.
Correct. Actually, I love the way you framed it on 2 points. I'm gonna talk to them about them separately, because I was having also the similar conversation for a different problem, that any single thing that you want to solve in the country, it will even start. You spoke about federal, provincial, and then municipal level. I would even, I was having a conversation. I even took it a step further. If you wanna create a better tomorrow, you need to start at home. You need to raise good people. You need to have a good, raise good kids, for them to become great parents, for them to elect proper people in the municipality on the municipality level, and then to have a proper leadership on the provincial level, and then move to federal level. I think it will cascade, from something very small to something very big overall. The second point I really loved, which actually talking about the policy, the policy part. Right now at Mission Monaco, how you guys how's your influence on this side of the part that we spoke about, policy and politics, I would say?
Well, I would say typically in our sector, in the community sector, we have not learned how to advocate properly for ourselves. Now, I say that the community sector often is capable of producing petitions and doing protest marches and things like that. But the proper advocacy is to work inside of government and alongside of government. Now, again, I'm a privileged individual because I get to sit on the National Housing Council of Canada. I was a ministerial appointee. I'm a board member of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I serve on the board of L'Arche Canada. I lead one of the more iconic institutions in Montreal. So people come and talk to me. But that's an unusual situation. I feel very privileged that ministers want to have conversations with me and explore what opinions I might have. So I'm in a position of being able to have some degree of influence over policy. How much is, of course, debatable. But at least, I can sit with Minister Fraser, the housing minister currently, and have a conversation. I can sit with Minister Carman, the social services minister here in Quebec. He calls me. We have good conversations. We sort out what the situation on the ground is. But when I'm doing that, I'm also doing it for the cause. I'm not trying to influence anything that's going to affect my organization, because my organization is just one piece of the puzzle. And if we can get the thing moving in the right direction, then we can play a role as an organization, or not, depending on what the need is. But the point is, we're going to solve the problem.
Correct.
So I'm totally dedicated to trying to solve the problem. I'm not as dedicated to trying to promote my organization, because I think that's counterproductive in this sector when we're facing a problem that really demands somebody who thinks at a higher level.
I think you're absolutely spot on, said something about that, because in every single part of the world, I've seen multiple countries. I've been in NGOs and nonprofits for a while as a volunteer first. Most of the time, you see this competition between those nonprofits, and they're kind of pushing their own agenda, and they're missing out the bigger picture, which is actually helping. So more or less, to think about it, you spoke something about the way we're failing and actually maybe moving on an advocacy level, not on just, okay, we have to house 100 people. Okay, done. So how can we get to a point to solve this problem from when it comes to your opinion?
Well, as I've said, we need to make sure that we treat it, first of all, for what it is, which is it's a healthcare problem. It's not a problem of a bunch of bad people or a bunch of bad actors. Yeah, there are some, just as there are people who are housed who are bad actors. But what we need to do is make sure that we recognize that the people who are struggling with poverty or struggling with homelessness or struggling because they've experienced violence, these are people who are human beings, who are citizens just like us, and who deserve to be well treated. And for years, the model of care in Canada has been one of saying, well, we provide free access to medicine and to medical treatments for everybody. Might not be totally equal, might not be perfect, but at least in theory, we have equal access to healthcare. But then what we do with our most vulnerable is we kind of leave them to the side. Oh, sure, they've got access, but they don't know how to get that access. And we allow under-equipped, underfunded, and in some cases underqualified not-for-profit community organizations to do their best to try and take care of them. And somehow that doesn't strike me as how we see ourselves as Canadians. We see ourselves as caring individuals. We see ourselves as the Boy Scouts of the world, the people, and look at the brand that we have as Canada. People want to come here. They want to be part of this country. And yet our treatment and our ability to serve some of the more vulnerable is, I think, a reason to call into question some of the values we purport to hold.
Wow, that's actually very, very spot on. I think Canada as a brand is known to be a nice place with nice people.
Yes.
It's a great place to be and with very nice people. And I've witnessed this so far firsthand, being here for a short while. It's a very welcoming country. It's a very welcoming country with very welcoming people. Even though I'll tell you something from an immigrant perspective, or for someone who's new to the country, what someone who's Canadian and has been here his whole life will see it as a problem. Another person, an immigrant or a person coming in, will see it as, this is way better than anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
But yes, there's always, if we're not in a place where we're always thriving to be better, then we're getting worse and worse and worse, which is, we always have to fight for this 1%. Going on the point of Mission Bon Accueil and, your leadership, I would say, as a person leading one of the major organizations, how do you define your leadership style for this period?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure how I define my leadership style. I would say that I'm not a hands-on person, so I don't micromanage people. I'm very keen on finding people that I trust, people who are not going to hide information from me, and making sure that they know they've got my full support and they need to go out and get the job done in their area of responsibility. I'm also somebody who's very curious. So I've said to people who aspire to positions of leadership that if you lose your curiosity, then it might be time for you to quit. Because I always want to be learning something. I always want to be growing. I go through every day expecting that I'm going to pick up some new piece of information. And so I ask questions. I'm somebody who sits and listens and asks questions. And with my current leadership team of 6 people, they're senior leaders. They're all excellent at what they do. I hold one meeting every single week. It's 59 minutes long. Exactly 59 minutes. We have topics that we know that are going to come to the table. Only things that concern all of us at the table are discussed. And if there's a need for a further discussion between individuals, that happens outside. And we have a number of protocols that we've agreed to in the meeting, like we will treat each other with respect. The things like that we all agree, they're part of the values of the organization. But, every once in a while, I'll say, hang on a second, let's go back to the values here. Are we all treating each other with respect? And even though I might know that the answer to that is no at the moment, but it elevates those kinds of things. So that's my style. Now, I do have one-on-ones as well with people as needed. But with 6 different individuals, they all have 6 very different styles. And that is fun for me because it forces me to flex. So I can't just do what I like doing. There are some that require more detailed attention from me. And there are others who, if I see them once a week, that might be a lot. And there are certain types of people who like to be communicated with a certain way. And so I adjust to their communication style rather than insisting on my own.
Nice. Is it much different from, let's say, from corporate to nonprofit, or what would you say the challenge is in nonprofit? Leading a team in nonprofits. What would be the challenging part about that?
I think there's a couple of things that some people put their finger on salaries right off, because salaries in the not-for-profit world are certainly not as high as you might find in the for-profit world. So people don't come to work with us because they can earn a huge salary. Now, I think our salaries at the Mission are competitive, but if somebody was talented and in their area of expertise, they could certainly earn more in the private sector if they so chose. I think one of the challenges that exists is sometimes when people join a not-for-profit organization, they think that butterflies fly around the place and that everybody is kind and loving and wonderful because of the nature of the mission that we're in. We're there helping people. We're providing free food, or we're providing free medical care, or we're providing shelter or housing, whatever. And so there's this assumption that somehow everybody's going to have all of the right motives all of the time and is going to be nice and kind and wonderful. And sometimes that doesn't happen. So I've tried to encourage people to recognize that there are human to human politics that happen anytime you get two people in a room. And now that's not to say that we tolerate bad behavior. I have what I call a no jerks policy at the mission. If you're a jerk, you're not going to last here. And we were able to ferret that out pretty quickly because, you can't always find it in a job interview. But after a little while of working with somebody, you can figure out if they're a good fit or not. And people who are not a good fit with the spirit of the organization, then we don't keep them around, and because we want to work on the culture. That's one of the key things that I do in our organization is walk around and repeat the vision, because vision leaks if you don't keep repeating it. But I also spend a lot of time making sure that our culture and our dynamics are following what we have up on the wall. We have stuff on the wall that says what we are. We better be doing what we say is on the wall. If we're not, then it's just on the wall.
They're not just, what you say it, like art or something, just words.
That's right.
Out there.
If we say excellence is a value, then we better be doing everything that's excellent. 100%. And when we're not, we better be correcting it.
On that note, you remind me of like a funny incident that happened with me. So at some point during my corporate life, I was an employee at Hasbro, the toy company. Mm-hmm. So Monopoly, Furby, Transformers, they're the biggest toy manufacturer in the world. And at some point, I kept saying, like, to my manager at that time, listen, I'm not happy. And then for 1 year, no one was doing anything about it. And then I was selling toys, but I was miserable. Mm-hmm. Like, imagine selling something which makes the logo of the company was a smile. Mm-hmm. But then after that, I wasn't smiling. And then I left. I was like, the guy was like, the HR was like, why are you leaving? I said, I've been telling you guys that for 1 year and a half that I'm not happy. Like, yeah, of course, if I take a Nerf gun and then, I play around in the office, it's going to be fun. But after that, it's not going to last for a while. So you're absolutely right, because at some point, one of the things that we, working with a lot of nonprofits and, even governments sometimes and initiatives, there is always this tricky part of, combining between the mission, the numbers, and people. Mm-hmm. This is very challenging. And in some places, think about it like this, and you would know it because you're a CEO and you're in a leading position with a leading organization. If it's good, everyone is praising. If it's bad, there's one person to blame. Mm. Agree?
Yeah, often it's the blame cascades kind of upward to the CEO. And look, I have to take ownership of things. And one of the dangers of being a leader in any organization is there can be things that are going on that you have no way of knowing about, but you have to take responsibility for it because that's the way it works. But I think there are things that we actually can control, or at least attempt to control, so that we're doing the things that will promote the sorts of things that you need to have in the organization so that people can thrive, because that's ultimately what we want. I want to do everything that I can to ensure, for example, that we've got a safe workplace. So we put all kinds of measures in place around health and safety. I want to make sure that people are not harassed psychologically on the job. We've got a huge, big, multi-page policy on psychological harassment. Now, you also need to do the other steps to make sure that when you begin to hear little things here and there about something that's going on, or a practice that doesn't align with those policies, that you take steps in order to make sure that you confront that. Because otherwise you're just sitting back and relying on the fact that you've got a policy or a practice that may not in fact be rolling out the way you want it.
It might not be in action. On this point, let's say, I'll ask you a situational question. I don't know if it ever happened to you. Let's say you have a top performing person, a great, he's a A player, but not a culture fit, and he's actually a negative impact on his coworkers at least. Have you ever had any similar situation?
Not at Welcome Home Mission, but I have had to manage situations like that in my corporate career. And what you do is you do everything you can to try to convince the person and show them where they're missing the mark. And you can have somebody who performs very well, but if they're annoying everybody or creating a ripple effect of evil in the organization, then you're going to have to address that at some point. Now, if the person is somebody that's unwilling to accept that kind of feedback, and I'm talking about very direct feedback to somebody, and if it doesn't have any effect, well, then that person can't stay. And so I've always had this mantra of being slow to hire, quick to fire. And, if somebody is not working out and I'm beginning to think maybe that person isn't fitting here, then I'm not going to go too much longer before I take action on that front. And I can't tell you how many times both in my corporate experience and at the mission, we've had to let somebody go and people come to me and say, I'm surprised you didn't do it sooner.
Wow. That, I think, because we've had it also, and like this, I would say, on multiple cases, we've heard it and see it happening. And at some point, you'd be surprised that everyone, like somehow, you would expect some people to come and say, like, or to voice their opinion about a similar problem. But like people in corporate or in even nonprofits, sometimes it's like they're very cautious about someone else's feeling, even if this person is actually affecting like a million other people, I would say. And even a million in a company is an overstatement. But let's say in a nonprofit, if you're affecting the workers, you're affecting everyone who's being helped by this organization. Now, a very interesting point which I had in mind right now, and I wanted to ask you about it. So you're leading, and everything is is going in the right direction. But also, we were talking earlier before we started recording that about the number of people, like the donors you guys have, or the number of helps you're getting from different aspects. How do you, like you as a CEO, how do you make sure that your donors, your stakeholders, and your like the people that are participating with you, to keep them coming back to help again and again and again?
Well, I think it starts with good people in the organization. So we have people who full-time manage our 450 volunteers. And you need to make sure, now we don't exist to give volunteers a great experience, but we want to give volunteers a great experience. So it's important that we manage that well, so that there's little tiny details that seem unimportant. Like if you schedule somebody, give them a follow-up to make sure that they're coming. Remind them. Make sure that on volunteer week that everybody gets a present, gets acknowledged. Make sure that you thank people. When somebody volunteers with us, they routinely get thank you notes from our team. Nice. People like being thanked. And the same thing goes for donors. You've got donors. I mean, one of the challenges of managing donors is to make sure that they feel engaged with the organization. It's one thing to send $100 to an organization. It's quite another to feel like you're part of helping to solve a problem. And so we work really hard with our donors, particularly certain cohorts of our donors, to make sure that they feel as if they're a partner with the mission. The same thing goes for our government partners. I don't just let them, send in money and hope for the best. We meet with them, we talk with them, we explain to them what we're doing, and we make sure that they're engaged. We bring even, the clerical people into our organization for a tour of the place. We don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. But by seeing the place and seeing what they're achieving by moving a piece of paper from one desk to another, that gives them a sense that they're doing more than just moving a piece of paper from one desk to another. And so those are the kinds of things that I think you need to do when you're leading an organization like ours.
Perfect. On this note, how would you think, for example, like let's say, if you want to think about your top, no need to mention them, but if you think about your top 3 donors, what's their motive to actually help? Because we hear a lot of stories about, there's always a hidden agenda. There's always, they're doing it for whether for tax purposes or, they have something else going on, or they're trying to actually push something in the background. Like, how can you judge, or how can you figure out, why they're actually helping? What's the purpose of this support?
That's a really good question, because I think philanthropy is changing from a top-down kind of thing, from a noblesse oblige, which it kind of used to be, which is, here I got lots of money, I'm going to give you a little bit of my money, to more of a partnership and to more of an understanding. Even the big foundations that fund a lot of causes have narrowed down their focus to say, okay, we're going to focus on the following 5 things, and we're going to partner with organizations that are really kicking it, that are getting the job done in those areas. And I think that's important. I also think it's equally important for organizations not to be led by the nose by donors. I've talked to CEOs who are in positions like mine who have donors come in and tell them what to do. I want to give you $100 and here's what I want you to do with it. I had one donor this morning that called me and had an agenda. I'm not going to go into what the agenda was,
of course,
but I was able to explain to her why it was that we do things the way we do them. And, one of the challenges of donors is you often have donors who say, I only want to give to the program part. I don't want to give to overhead. Well, of course, the challenge with any organization like ours is without overhead, you can't deliver the program.
Run the program, exactly.
And so it's a misunderstanding of the whole concept of community service. We are very happy when a marketing organization spends money on advertising. We are unhappy when a not-for-profit spends it on advertising because we think somehow all that money should be going to programming. But yet, if you don't actually advertise and you don't get the money to do the programming, and if you don't have the overhead that's necessary, I mean, I'll give you an example. We run 2 free grocery stores. 10,000 people a month come to the 2 free grocery stores.
Wow.
In order to run 2 free grocery stores, I need a 350,000 cubic feet warehouse. I need fridges and freezers, 15,000 square feet of those things. I need 4 trucks that are refrigerated at $160,000 each. I need forklifts. I need people. I need to be able to sort food because food comes in bulk. I need to pay Hydro-Quebec. They don't give me electricity for free. So all of that is overhead. And so what we need to make sure that people who are into philanthropy and into giving understand is that in order to deliver what it is that they want us to be delivering, that we do need to have that back-end support. And that's part of the challenge that we face is to help people, and we're back to what I was saying earlier, change public perceptions around how we're dealing with the challenge. If you change the public's perception, then all of a sudden everything can change. If the public continues to perceive charities as a throwaway, give them second best, give them a few cents here, hopefully they'll make it. Don't ever spend any money on overhead, only deliver programs, well then you can't really do anything. As long as that's the perception, then we're not going to be able to make progress on the major issues of our era.
Correct. Actually, on this point, and that's thank you for a great answer. Have you noticed any pattern? How long you've been running for leading Mission Bon Accueil so far?
I've been there since 2016.
2016.
So,
wow. So
very interesting. The interesting story too, and I'll give you a little background. It's a fun story. Is I got a phone call from a headhunter out of the blue. Said the current CEO of Welcome Hall Mission is retiring, and we think you'd be a good candidate to be a fit there. And I said, no thanks. I love what I do. Enjoying what I do immensely, but I appreciate, I'm flattered. Went home and told my wife. And she said, well, hang on a second. If the Montreal Canadiens phoned you and said, we're looking for a general manager, would you go in and talk to them? And I said, heck yes. I don't know the first thing about running a hockey team, but this is the Montreal Canadiens. And she said, well, this is Welcome Hall Mission. You should at least go and talk to them. So I did. And what I discovered was an organization that had a great foundation, had great people, was big, but also was not afraid to innovate and was not afraid to try stuff and decide that, no, that didn't work. And so we're not going to do it anymore. And to me, that was a fun opportunity. The structure had been well built by my predecessor. And what it needed was somebody, as it turns out, with my skill sets to take it to the next level. And I'm quite convinced that whoever the next CEO is, will probably take it to another level too.
Wow, that's amazing to hear, and thank you for a great leadership saying this sentence, because it's not always, you have at least like a certain number of people that most of their thoughts is that I can do it, but no one else can do it better after that. But to say that I'm 100% sure that the next person is going to do even a better job, that takes a real leader to say that.
Yeah.
On this point, which also thinking about it, okay, I think number one advice on that would be always listen to your wife, and I'll listen to mine as well.
Yes,
that's my default. And then, when you walked in to Mission Bon Accueil, and then you took this position first day in, how was it?
Well, first of all, it was an unusual situation because in our sector, you normally are either the founder of the organization or you've worked your way up through a variety of charitable organizations. When I walked into the building on my first day, I was the CEO. And so everybody was saying, oh, gee whiz. I mean, we've had a CEO for the last 13 years who really knew this organization. He had come from the board. So he'd been a board member, then a CEO. And the general consensus on the outside of the mission is Welcome All mission's done. Look at what they've done. They've gone and hired somebody from the corporate sector. But the people who were there were quite accepting. I had to make a few changes. That always happens. But the interesting thing was that it was about a 1-year learning curve to figure out what a complex organization like the mission was doing and to make sure I got my head around a number of things. But it really was not that big a transition in my view. Probably the biggest single transition was that I'd spent 14 years as a management consultant. So I hadn't been hands-on running an organization with people and with moving parts. I'd been walking through those organizations. I'd been helping out with it, but it was a little bit different now that it was all on my shoulders.
And it's a day-to-day thing. It's not like you're just walking in, giving them a solution, and then you're studying, giving them a solution, and then leaving. You're actually doing that and witnessing the execution and then bearing with the outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that did happen in my first 6 months or so was that I had to make a major change involving an individual. And that was not something that I had planned on doing, but it was kind of one of those things that as a leader you couldn't avoid. Mm-hmm. And so one of my mentors, who's a president of a large company, a large for-profit company, told me, when you become CEO, Sam, don't make any rash changes in your first year, but make sure you make some changes in your second year. Because if you don't make any changes in your second year, they'll think it's business as usual. We're just going to march on and do everything. But he said, if you make too many in your first year, they're going to say, well, he doesn't understand this organization. You may actually make some mistakes by making those changes. And I was in a position where there really wasn't much of an option but to make a bit of a structural change in order to make sure we serve the people in need much better, and also to eliminate what was a silo that was unhelpful. And so that was one of the challenges that I had early on. And the other thing that I discovered early on was that we were faced with a challenge. We were bringing in just enough money to kind of survive, but not to have enough money to be able to move or to have flexibility.
To thrive.
Well, even flexibility, because you know, if you're bringing in the same amount of money as you're spending, you're going to have a cash flow problem.
Correct.
Because you do have, balance sheet items that you've got to deal with. Plus, you've got the challenge that, money doesn't always come in line with when expenses are incurred. So I faced the challenge of saying, do we cut services, which often means people, or do we grow revenue? Well, because of my background, the only thing I really know how to do is grow revenue. I've been part of organizations where we cut back on services, but I've always said that you can cut your way to survival, but you can only grow your way to health. And so we put programs in place to grow the revenues, and that's essentially what we did at the mission, to make sure that we got to a point where the foundation and the flexibility financially of the mission was such that we could take on some of the things that we're now taking on.
Mainly when you when you talk about growing revenue, which is donations, this is the main thing. So when you talk about growing revenue and growing donations, is it outreach? Is it connection? Is it networking? Is it being out there? Is it government? How is the structure overall?
Yes.
All of them.
To
all
all
of the
of
above.
them. and then some. I often refer to our efforts as the octopus, because if you've got 8 different tentacles that are moving and hopefully going in the same direction, then the fish can move. So we do have things that we do in the area of thought leadership, in the area of marketing, publicity, advertising. We certainly do a fair amount of direct mail solicitation, but we also work in stewarding the donors that we have. And yes, government revenues are helpful. We do have other revenues. We own buildings, and some of the buildings have tenants in them that pay us rent. One of our buildings has a city library in it. And nice. So I like to remind the mayor that they pay rent to us. Those are things that you can sometimes do. And, it's allowed us to get to the point where we've bought a couple of more buildings, and We've got 3 big projects underway for this year. So in 2025, I'm hoping to cut the ribbon on 3 different things that are all going to elevate the level of service that we can provide to Montrealers in need.
This is great. Would you say, Sam, overall, across those years, are Canadians helping less or helping more?
Well, statistically, Canadians are helping less. So if you look at it, fewer people are donating. Those who are donating more money. But it's a challenging environment because you look at all the data connected with donations and Canadians who donate to charities. If you start narrowing out some of the areas like churches and religious institutions or giving to healthcare and university foundations, the community sector has always been one that has had, I'll say that has not been as well supported. Now, I think that even when that happens, I just refuse to be part of the general cohort. I find ways, and I think it's important for any leader to take a look at a cohort and say, look, I don't think I need to be part of that. I'm going to do some things that are going to make us an outlier. And so as Welcome Hall Mission, I think if they looked at our financial situation and the way we approach donors and revenue generation, we are a little bit of an outlier. And to some of that, is credited to my corporate background, if you will. I'm an old marketing guy. And so I think I know how to position ourselves in the way that people are going to respond. But there's also that very human touch that you need to have. And as we've spoken about earlier, making sure that people are clear on the cause. If people are really clear on the cause, then all you need to do is make sure that they care about the cause. And then they believe that you can do something that will actually allow their money or their gift or their time to contribute to dealing with the cause. And when those are all in place, then they talk to their friends.
It's the perfect formula. It's the best formula. On this note, basically one of my mentors, he always mentioned that people, they buy from people and people help people. Mm-hmm. They will never do that with a company or if I know you, I'll help you. If I don't know you, I will not help you. So the thing is, which I'm going to go back to a point which you mentioned, and it was like an early question I was going to ask. You mentioned that one of your mentors is a CEO of a big corporations. So when everyone talks that when you're a CEO, when you're leading, it's lonely up there.
Yes.
It's really lonely. And I'll tell you that because I've been trying, doing things for a while. And when you're hustling, it's like, it feels like as if on your own, because at the end of the day, number 3 going onwards from the company, they're all getting their stuff. They all have their KPIs. They all have their things which are set by either number 1 or number 2 in the company. So as a number 1, who keeps you moving forward and what keeps you moving forward?
I'm fortunate in that, first of all, my wife has a high-level job. I can come home and talk to her, and she does the same with me to some extent. Although a lot of what she works on is highly classified stuff, so she can't get into the details. But I also have a network of other CEOs that are in the same space. So I'll talk to CEOs in Ottawa. I'll talk to CEOs in Vancouver. And those sorts of things are helpful. Because to some extent you can run some things off of them. I also have a very unique situation, something that almost no other CEO has, in that the former CEO, who was the chairman of the board, is now the chairman of the board again. Oh. And has been for some time. So he sat in the seat. He knows the landscape. And he also knows where his role starts and stops. And so it's kind of fun to be able to bounce something off somebody even 8 years down the line, and say, hey, what do you think of this? And sometimes what he has to say to me is extremely valuable. Sometimes maybe not as much, but at least it's somebody that I can bounce something off of. Now, the challenge for most people in my role is it's very hard for them to go to their board or their chairman with a half-baked idea. And it's very hard to go to your people with a half-baked idea.
They're burning.
So it can be a bit of a challenge. And I do recommend that CEOs develop some sort of network or sounding board that they can use that is much more than just a complaint session. I used to get together with a group of CEOs in our sector, and all they did endlessly was complain about how poorly their revenue was coming in and how bad their board was. And so just the endless complaints about their board. And I just got tired of that because it really wasn't giving me any nourishment. But I think if you can find somebody that you can bounce things off of that actually feeds you, that challenges you sometimes too, then that can be very valuable as a leader.
Perfect. What about, so we covered in terms of mentorship, in terms of, like people that to bounce idea with. What about reading? Are you a fan of reading?
Oh, I have, I'd like to think maybe 1,000 books in my library.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I try to read as many current business publications as I can. And obviously I've got some favorites from the past. I mean, I talk about a life changer for me was reading a book called Execution by the guy who founded Intel. I also, read obviously things like Good to Great. So those are the sorts of things that you pick up, and you pick up on the principle of the flywheel, for example, and how, it's a little tough to get it moving, but once you get it moving. So there's things like that I think have been very helpful for me over the years. The other thing that I do, which is kind of fun, and I'm just so lucky to be able to do it, is I get invited to be a guest speaker at MBA classes at both Concordia and at McGill. And I do that about 5 times a year, I'd say. And that's a great opportunity for me to interact with students who have a completely different perspective than I would have because they're 30 years younger than me. And, I get to present, I get to talk about what I do, which is a little bit unusual because they're often meeting with CEOs of for-profit companies. So I come in there and
sell.
Yeah, I'm just a little different. And it's not just my shoes that are different. It's lots of other things. And so I get to exchange ideas. And I find that to be something that nourishes as well. So I always say to people, you better be talking to a lot of folks out there. Talk to people who are a lot younger than you too. I have a lot of staff members who are younger, and I'll sometimes just ask for an opinion just out of the blue. Hey, what do you think of this? And not necessarily giving away some sort of great corporate strategy or anything, but to try and get a perspective, get them to tell me what they think about something. And I think most of my team members at every level of the organization knows that it's safe to talk to me. I was with somebody recently, and there was an outside presenter from the CNEST, the body that manages health and welfare in Quebec. And she asked a question. It was just me and this other person who I'd never really met before, but one of our employees. And she said, I don't know if you're comfortable answering this question in front of the CEO. And he turned and looked at me and said, I can answer anything in front of him, which I thought was a great affirmation for how people feel about me.
This is great, actually, because on that note, you're absolutely right, because it's when you're a CEO, it's you're driving, you're seeing the bigger picture, and then trying to make everyone believe about that. But it also, I would say, everyone talks about the challenge of having too many people report to you, or like what is the good balance between being close yet being firm, yet being and having some time to focus on your own, because if you're so much focused inwards, someone has to be focused outwards. So how do you keep a good balance of that?
Well, in my case, a lot of my focus is actually outward. The 6 people who report to me are really the people who run the mission day in, day out. And I check in with them. And if I hear something or something pops up or there's an operational issue, I'm certainly going to get involved to the extent that I can be helpful or I can remove an obstacle. But a lot of what I do is actually very externally focused. So I would say that 50% of my time is spent working on things that are outside the organization, but could have an impact on the organization. So dealing with the government, dealing with the hospital network, dealing with the media, things like that are important and that I'm probably uniquely positioned to do. That require kind of that broad overview of how the ecosystem works. So that's the sort of place that I spend my time. I'm not somebody who's going to, dig in unless I see a problem. I was advised of one just this morning that was, very operational, but I'm not going to spend my time digging in. I'm just going to ask somebody to fix it.
And that's the right way to go. And I still have 2 questions in mind, which are literally my favorite 2 questions. What keeps you up at night and what wakes you up in the morning?
Well, the wake me up in the morning part is the alarm clock. Every morning at 5 o'clock, and that's my gym time. So we have a gym in the house, and I go there and do a half hour or so of stretching and treadmill and whatever else I feel like. But so the waking up in the morning is never a problem. And I've always said that there's not much that keeps me awake at night, because I sleep really well, and I'm not a worrier by nature. So, there are other things that I'm concerned about. I was doing a big press conference today. It would be a lie to say I wasn't thinking about that late last night, because there are a lot of things that can go south when you're hosting a press conference and
with ministers,
and you've been advised literally less than 24 hours earlier that you were going to do this.
Push the session, actually.
That's right. Because, that's the sort of thing that can happen. So, I would say that, to be really frank about it, I'm always concerned when you're leading an organization that there could be something going wrong somewhere that you're unaware of, that it's difficult for you to be aware of, but that could come sort of trailing back to bite you. Because ultimately it's your head as the CEO that's on the chopping block. And so I'm aware of, when you lead an organization that has as terrific a reputation as the mission does, that it wouldn't take much for a reputational challenge to occur. And, I've always said to my board, if you want to look at a risk register, the biggest single risk we have is loss of reputation, and you can't insure for that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if you wanted to use the expression of what keeps me up at night, it would be that I would be concerned about any kind of reputational hit that we could take because of something we did or didn't do.
Awesome. That's great. And to sum up, I would say, the last question, what's next for Sam?
It's a good question. I've always had the feeling that it was very liberating to not be looking for your next job. And yet I will honestly tell you that virtually every political party has approached me, trying to get me to jump in and join them and run for office. I don't see myself there. I've never said never, but I don't see that as being in my future. I'd like to, frankly, stay at Welcome Hall Mission for the next couple of years and hopefully do some more great things, and then maybe ride off into the sunset, or maybe do something else. One of my friends who retired from a similar job said, "I'm not retiring, I'm rewiring." And so
that's good.
I think that most of us have, when you hit the magic age of 60 or 65 or 70, all of a sudden everything doesn't come to an end. These days, I think a lot of people are doing some very productive things well into their 80s. And so I don't know what's next, but I think I'd love to be able to continue to serve for the foreseeable future. And at the very least, if I'm not at Welcome Hall Mission in the future, I'd like to serve the causes that I care about in any meaningful way.
Would you say, I know I said the last question, but this is really it brought another one. When you mentioned that you've been approached by political parties, would you consider this as a next step at some point?
Well, like I said, I've never said never, but the challenge with politics versus what I'm doing right now is one that I would articulate as, do you have a greater impact? I think what I do right now can have a lot of impact, whereas when you're in politics, it is very much a team sport. So first of all, you have to play on the team. Whether you agree with a lot of the things that are happening in your political party or not, you've got to play on the team. And the other thing is, if you're not in government or if you're not a minister, you have limited ability to influence. So is it really the kind of lifestyle that you want then? Because one of the things that I largely get doing what I do is my weekends free. When you're in elected office, your weekends are not your own.
Exactly.
And, so it's considerations like that. But I think it really turns around my assessment of whether or not I can have a greater impact doing what I do versus something else. And that'll always be the way that I balance the scales is we're in a position where I've said before, I'm very fortunate to be able to have the ear of influential people, to be able to actually be on the ground working with teams that are helping people get back into housing, that are helping people put groceries on their table. So we're in a unique position as the mission. We're not just a bunch of activists. Ross Perot, who I don't quote very often, once said that the activist is not the person who yells the river is dirty. The activist is the person who cleans up the river. And so I'm talking about the river being dirty, but we're also leading an organization that is helping clean the river.
On this note, I'm gonna also tell you about one sentence which one of our CEOs that we work with and a thought leader, Johnny C. Taylor, he's the CEO of Sherm. In one of his biggest conferences, it was in Vegas. They have a yearly conference about 30,000 attendees. He mentioned the theme last year was be a thermostat, not a thermometer. What's the difference? A thermometer will tell you only the temperature. A thermostat is willing to shift to solve a problem. So I think that was that's an extension on the part that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Okay, last word for CEOs in your sector. Advice or a word or anything on top of mind.
Well, I think one of the key things is to look beyond your organization. You do have to manage your organization, but you have to understand the ecosystem within which your organization is functioning. And I think in our sector, there are a lot of people who are very good people, but only focused on their own shop, I'll call it that. And it's not enough. It really isn't enough. Of course, you do have to make sure that your own entity is running properly, that you're doing what needs to be done as a leader. But the other thing that I would say is continue to grow. Don't shut down and think you've arrived. I think the minute a CEO or any leader for that matter thinks that they've learned all they're going to learn or they know all they need to know, I think that's where problems can begin.
Amazing. Sam, thank you for a great conversation. It was really a pleasure and it was very enriching. Looking forward to actually keeping an eye at what you guys are doing. And then, since we're here now, we're going to see it firsthand about seeing the impact. And thank you for being with us.
You're very welcome.